He thought it was just another flight, just a tired man with a surprise upgrade and a heavy heart. But when he gave up his first-class seat for two little girls he didn't even know, he had no idea who was watching, or how that single act of kindness would completely rewrite the rest of his life. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and like the video, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. Jonas Wells wasn't used to good surprises. Life had given him plenty of the other kind, especially in the last few years. But today, as he stood at the boarding gate of Terminal 4 in Portland International Airport, something had shifted. The Nyson gate agent had looked up from her screen with a smile and said, "Mr. Wells, you've been upgraded to first class. Enjoy the flight to Madrid." He had blinked in disbelief. "First class?" "Yes, sir. It's your lucky day." Jonas had never flown first class in his life. Honestly, he hadn't flown anywhere in years. Since his wife passed, his world had shrunk. The color seemed to drain out of things. He stopped painting, stopped traveling. He just existed. But this trip was supposed to be different. He had saved for over a year, telling himself he needed a change, something to remind him that he was still alive, still allowed to feel joy. Madrid was where he and his wife once dreamed of going. She loved Spanish architecture. Jonas loved sketching it. Now, holding his boarding pass like it was made of gold, he stepped onto the plane, trying not to look completely out of place. He followed the polite gestures of the flight crew and found his seat. It was large and soft, more like a fancy armchair than a plane seat. There was even a little menu waiting for him. He let out a slow breath and sank into the seat, the tension in his shoulders beginning to melt for the first time in months. But the peace didn't last. A few minutes later, he heard soft voices nearby. He looked up to see two little girls standing near the aisle, each holding onto the strap of a backpack almost as big as they were. One girl clutched a stuffed rabbit, the other rubbed her eyes sleepily. Behind them stood an older woman, clearly flustered, clearly stressed, trying to explain something to the flight attendant. "I understand," the woman said, "but there's only one seat in economy, and I can't leave the girls here alone." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the attendant replied gently, "but the system shows just one ticket under your name. The girls can't be in economy alone, and unaccompanied minors can't sit here in first without a guardian." Jonas watched quietly. He could feel the tension building. The older woman, maybe their aunt or nanny, was near tears. Other passengers were already looking away, pretending not to hear. The girls looked lost. The younger one held her rabbit tighter. The older one tried to smile, but her lip trembled, and then Jonas did something without even thinking. He stood up. "Excuse me," he said, stepping forward. "They can have my seat. I'll go back to economy." Everyone turned to look at him. The flight attendant blinked. The older woman looked surprised. "Sir," she said, "you really don't have to. They need it more than I do." Jonas replied with a kind smile. The girls looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. The rabbit-holding one gave the smallest smile. The flight crew acted quickly. The girls were brought forward, the woman whispering a breathless thank you to Jonas, her voice full of emotion. Jonas didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like anything special. He just felt human. And maybe for the first time in a long while, he felt useful. As he picked up his bag and walked toward the back of the plane, people watched him. A few nodded politely. A young flight attendant caught his eye and smiled, not the professional kind, but the real kind. He found his new seat near the back. It was smaller, a little noisier, and definitely less fancy. But Jonas didn't mind. He leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes. Back in first class, the girls were now seated and calm. The older woman had tears in her eyes, and a woman sitting 2 rows behind them, dressed in a neat gray business suit, quietly watched it all unfold, her face unreadable. She didn't say a word, but she pulled out her phone and began to type a message. Jonas didn't know any of this. He didn't know that one simple act of kindness had just set something in motion, something that would take him far beyond the quiet life he had known. something that would change how he saw the world, and how the world saw him. All he knew was that it felt good to help. And in a small, quiet way, he felt like his heart had taken its first real breath in a very long time. Jonas Wells adjusted the seatbelt around his waist and glanced around the economy cabin. It was louder here. Babies cried, trays clinked, and the narrow seats seemed to press people closer together than they wanted to be. But Jonas didn't mind. After all, he was still on his way to Madrid, still chasing the memory of a dream. He placed his small bag under the seat in front of him and leaned back. The seat wasn't as soft. The legroom was tighter, and the man beside him had already taken the armrest. Still, Jonas felt oddly at peace. He had given his first-class seat to those two little girls without hesitation. It hadn't even felt like a choice. He stared out the small oval window. The airport lights faded as the plane pushed back from the gate. As they rumbled down the runway, he thought of his wife, Claire. She had always believed that kindness, no matter how small, could change the world. Jonas used to believe it too. But over the years, after her illness and the long months that followed, that belief had grown dim. Still, something about those girls reminded him. The way the younger one had held onto her rabbit. The way the older one had tried to look brave for her sister. Claire would have smiled at that. A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Hi, are you a teacher or something?" Jonas turned to see a boy, maybe 16 or 17, sitting beside him. He wore big headphones around his neck and had a nervous energy, like he wasn't used to flying. "I used to be," Jonas said. "Art teacher." "Cool," the boy said, nodding. "I'm Milo. This is my first flight." Jonas smiled gently. "Well, Milo, you're doing just fine so far." Milo grinned, but Jonas could see the nerves behind it. "You gave up your seat for those girls, right? I saw that." Jonas looked a little embarrassed. "Yeah, I guess I did." "That was really cool," Milo said. "Not a lot of people would have done that." "I didn't do it to be cool," Jonas said with a chuckle. "I just thought it was the right thing." The plane lifted off the ground, and Milo grabbed the armrests tightly. Jonas tried not to laugh, but he reached out gently and said, "It's just like riding an elevator, only sideways." Milo let out a shaky laugh. "You sure?" "I've ridden worse," Jonas said. "Once took a bus through the mountains. In a thunderstorm, this is practically a nap." Milo laughed again, this time more relaxed. "You should be in first class. They have snacks and movies." Jonas shrugged. "Snacks are nice, but a smile goes a long way too." They sat in quiet for a while after that, the plane humming as it climbed through the clouds. Jonas closed his eyes, trying to rest, but his thoughts kept circling back to the girls. He hoped they were comfortable. He hoped their aunt, or whoever she wasn't too worried now. What he didn't know was that a few rows ahead in first class, those girls were quietly giggling over their apple juice. Their Aunt Edith had finally relaxed, and 2 seats behind them, the woman in the gray business suit, Naomi Clark, watched silently. She hadn't spoken to anyone yet, but she had seen everything. From the moment Jonas stood up to offer his seat, to the way he smiled at the girls without hesitation, Naomi had been observing. She was a woman used to people treating her children differently when they found out who she was. But Jonas didn't know. And still, he gave. She leaned back in her seat and typed a message on her phone. Track the man who gave up his seat. Seat 4A. Name: Jonas Wells. Back in economy, Jonas was looking out the window again, watching the stars appear as the sky darkened. Milo had fallen asleep beside him, snoring softly. Jonas didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel important, but something inside him felt lighter. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He remembered Claire once saying, "Sometimes the best art we make is the kindness we leave behind." Maybe this flight wasn't just a trip to Spain. Maybe it was something more. The flight landed just after sunrise. The sky over Madrid was painted in soft orange and pink, casting a golden light through the plane's windows. Jonas Wells stretched his legs and rubbed his eyes. He hadn't slept much, but he felt calmer. lighter somehow. Passengers began gathering their things, voices filling the cabin. Overhead bins opened, bags thudded to the floor, and people shuffled in the narrow aisles. Jonas waited patiently, letting others go ahead of him. Milo, the teenager from the flight, gave him a quick fist bump and said, "See you, Mr. Art Teacher." Jonas smiled. Safe travels, Milo. When it was finally his turn to step off the plane, Jonas grabbed his backpack and moved toward the exit. As he stepped into the jet bridge, the air felt warmer than it had in Portland, dry with a hint of airport coffee and morning air. He expected to walk through the arrivals area, maybe find a taxi and head to his small, rented room in the city. But as he approached the gate, a flight attendant gently touched his arm. "Mr. Wells, could you wait here for a moment, please?" Jonas looked surprised. "Is something wrong?" She smiled kindly. "No, not at all. Someone would like a word with you." Before he could ask more, she stepped aside, and a woman approached from the waiting area. She was tall, graceful, and wore a sharp gray suit with a dark blue scarf tied around her neck. Her steps were firm, confident. Her expression serious but not unkind. She stopped a few feet in front of Jonas and studied him quietly. "You must be Jonas Wells," she said. He nodded slowly, unsure of what was happening. "Yes, I am." The woman extended a hand. "Naomi Clark, CEO of Skyline Ventures." Jonas shook her hand, still confused. "I'm sorry, Skyline?" She offered a small smile. "I run the airline you just flew with." Jonas blinked. "Oh, wow. Okay, is everything all right?" Naomi nodded. "Yes, more than all right. I wanted to meet you." He looked puzzled. "Me? Why?" She tilted her head, studying him again. "You gave up your first-class seat yesterday for 2 little girls. My daughters." Jonas stared at her. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. "Those were your girls?" "Yes," Naomi said softly. "Nina and Lucy. I booked their tickets under my sister's name to avoid attention. But I was sitting nearby. I saw the whole thing." Jonas lowered his eyes. "I just thought they needed the seat more than I did." Naomi folded her arms gently. "You didn't know who they were. You didn't ask for anything, you just gave. That kind of kindness is rare, Mr. Wells." He smiled awkwardly, feeling a little embarrassed. "Honestly, I didn't do anything special. Anyone would have," she interrupted with a kind but firm tone. "That's where you're wrong. Most people wouldn't. They look away. They protect what's theirs. But you chose empathy over comfort." Jonas was quiet. He wasn't used to praise. He wasn't used to being seen. Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek business card. "This is my direct contact. On the back is the number to my personal assistant," she said. "From now on, if you ever book a flight on any airline, owned by Skyline, you're flying first class, always." Jonas looked stunned. I can't accept that." Naomi smiled. "You already did. When you gave something without knowing who was watching." She slipped the card into his hand. "But that's not all." Jonas blinked. "There's more?" Naomi nodded. "I did some research after the flight. I saw you used to be an art teacher. I saw the gallery pieces you submitted years ago." Jonas felt his chest tighten. That part of his life felt far away now. "I happen to know the director of the Skyline Madrid Lounge," she continued. "He's been looking for new artists to feature. If you're interested, I can set up a meeting." Jonas was speechless. His throat felt dry. "You don't have to do this." "No," Naomi said, smiling warmly now. "But I want to. You reminded me and my daughters that there are still people in the world who act with heart. That matters." From behind her, 2 small voices called out, "Mr. Jonas." He turned to see Nina and Lucy running toward him, sleepy but smiling. They each held little carry-on bags. One still had her rabbit. They stopped in front of him, and Nina said, "Thank you for your seat." Lucy added, "Mommy said you're a good person." Jonas knelt down. "You two were very brave. I'm glad you had a good flight." The girls hugged him quickly before their aunt came to gather them. Naomi gave him one last look. "I hope we speak again soon," she said. "But until then, enjoy your trip. You've earned it." With that, she turned and walked away, her daughters following like little shadows behind her. Jonas stood alone in the bright terminal, holding the card in his hand. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like just a tired man carrying grief. He felt seen. He felt like maybe, just maybe, something good was waiting around the next corner. The small hotel room in Madrid was quiet, tucked away in an old building just off a cobblestone street. Jonas Wells sat on the edge of the bed, the morning sun pouring in through the open window. Outside, the city buzzed with life, bicycles ringing, footsteps echoing on stone, and the soft hum of Spanish conversation drifting up from a nearby cafe. Jonas held Naomi Clark's business card in his hand. He'd looked at it a dozen times since the airport. The black lettering was sharp and clean. It felt heavy with possibility, like the first page of a sketchbook. He still couldn't believe any of it had happened. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. He opened it to find a hotel staff member smiling politely and holding a package. "Senor Wells?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes?" "This was just delivered for you." He took the box and thanked her. Inside, wrapped in soft tissue paper, was a leather-bound sketchbook and a handwritten note. The handwriting was neat and careful, with little hearts drawn beside the names. "Dear Mr. Jonas, thank you for giving up your seat. Thank you for being kind. My rabbit liked first class too. We hope you draw beautiful things in this book. Maybe one of us. Love, Nina and Lucy." With help from Mom, Jonas smiled, touched more than he could say. Beneath their message was another small card with a time and address, an invitation to the Skyline Lounge at Madrid's main terminal for an art meeting. That afternoon he went. He didn't expect much, but curiosity pushed him forward. The lounge was elegant, with soft lighting and tall windows. A man in a tan blazer greeted him, shaking his hand firmly. His name was Marco, the director Naomi had mentioned. "I heard what you did on that flight," Marco said with a warm grin. "Not many people would have done the same. Naomi told me you're an artist." "I used to be," Jonas said. "Maybe it's time you start again," Marco replied. "We rotate artists here every season. We'd love to feature your work." Jonas wasn't sure what to say. It felt surreal. Just days ago he was packing his bag, unsure if this trip was a mistake. Now he was being offered a space to show his art in one of the busiest international lounges in Europe. Over the next week, Jonas wandered through Madrid with a pencil in hand and the girl's sketchbook in his bag. He drew buildings and people, street musicians and tiny cafes. He let his heart guide the lines, just like Claire had taught him. Something inside him had shifted. The heaviness he'd carried for years had started to lift. Not disappear completely, but change shape. It was no longer a weight pressing down. It was something he carried with care and purpose, like an old photograph. On his final day in the city, as he sipped coffee and finished a street sketch, his phone buzzed. It was an email from Naomi's assistant. Subject: Confirmation of permanent. Upgrade message: Mr. Wells, your account has been marked for lifetime first-class privileges across all Skyline partner airlines. We also received word from a small art school in Seville interested in your sketches. They would love to speak with you. Details below. Congratulations, and thank you again for what you did. Jonas put the phone down slowly. He looked out at the square, watching people laugh, walk, and live. He thought of how one moment of kindness, just one, had opened a door to something unexpected. He had given up a soft seat on a plane. In return, he had been given a second chance to live the life he once dreamed of. A week later, back in the United States, Jonas returned to his apartment and unpacked slowly. The sketchbook was full of drawings now, and one of them, titled The Offer, would soon hang in Skyline's lounge, just as Marco had promised. It showed a man rising from his seat. Two little girls stood beside him, one with a rabbit, the other with hopeful eyes. In the background was a soft outline of clouds outside the window. Weeks turned into months. Jonas began teaching part-time at a local community center, holding drawing workshops for children and adults. He traveled more. Not for luxury, but for life. He visited new cities with his sketchbook always ready. And he never boarded a plane without remembering that day in Portland, when he chose to give with no idea anyone was watching. Sometimes the news picked up the story. Blogs wrote about it. People on social media called him the kind stranger who gave up first class. But Jonas never chased attention. He just smiled and went back to his sketching. Because in the end, the greatest gift he received wasn't a fancy seat or a headline. It was something quieter. He had remembered who he was, and in that remembering he found joy again.